You never really know when someone starts to believe in something, especially, sadly, Elizabeth passed before I came into the picture and before Minnestrista came into the picture. But what we can do is speculate. We can look at the resources that she had available. Sitting here in the library, there are cases that surround the room, and as a child, those would have been filled with her father's childhood children's book collection. In that book collection, there would have been countless popular books of the time that reference fairies. Things like The White Bird, which is the first reference of Peter Pan, and the Fairies and Tinker Bell. So books like that, Elizabeth certainly would have been exposed to at an early age. And she actually kept a list, a resource journal, stating each book that she read and when and the author, and several of the books included in that list have fairies referenced throughout them. Elizabeth Ball was born and raised here in this home, Oakhurst, and she was born to her parents, both Frances and George Ball, of the Ball brothers fame, of course. And Elizabeth was an only child, so growing up in this home meant that she was the youth, she was the spirit of the home, the playfulness, but surrounding the home, much like there are today, are gardens. So Elizabeth had her own free-reign playground here inside the home, but also out surrounding the home in those gardens. She was born in 1897, and she actually lived in this home, never married, never had children, until she passed in 1982 at the age of 84. Elizabeth actually had two outbuildings in addition to this home. One was a dollhouse. Sadly, Elizabeth was plagued quite a bit each year with hay fever. And imagining this row of homes, parents who loved the outdoors, obviously they built a home out of oak in comparison to the limestone and brick of their relatives next door. They choose a lot with oak trees on it, and they have a child who can't enjoy that outdoor environment. So her father, George, has a dollhouse built for her just a couple steps outside the back side of the home here. So Elizabeth could still be immersed in the outdoors, but protected from all the pollen and all the other ailments of hay fever. And that was a place that she spent her childhood days playing and exploring and imagining and having tea parties with the fairies, for the fairies, etc. We have a great historical note from her childhood best friend, Emily Kimbrough, who grew up just a couple blocks away in downtown Muncie. And apparently Elizabeth was over at Emily's house and did not want to eat her peas, or certainly believed and saw that there was a fairy sitting on the spoon of peas. And regardless, she stressed to Emily's mother that she could not eat that last spoonful of peas because there simply was a fairy sitting on them. We have a collection of Elizabeth's poems along with some of her other notes and recollections in Oakhurst Poems Orbita Scripta. So I'll read one of my favorites, or maybe a few, because some of them are quite short. So in July of 1917, Elizabeth wrote, which by the way she would have been roughly 19 years old at the time. This poem is entitled The Fairy. Once I saw a fairy, tiny in the grass. She moved along so quickly, I hardly saw her pass. Yet I know it was a fairy, for the shimmer of her wing left a little flitting sunbeam on a web where dewdrops cling. No offense to Shakespeare, but he was not the first to reference fairies in any of his works, in particular in Midsummer's Night's Dream. But it is one of the more famous works, just like Tinker Bell. That's kind of the modern go-to reference for fairies. Prior to that, it would have been going to Shakespeare and looking at his references of fairies. But fairies all around the world, in particular England and Celtic lore, predate Shakespearean works.
If we begin to look at the Celtic and English lore, what we find is not your average Tinker Bell fairy. Creatures such as elves and changelings are also in the category of fairies. Changelings are fairy babies that have been exchanged for human babies. But when looking more in depth into the fairies that Elizabeth believed in, the more familiar description comes to mind. They were small in size and wore clothes made from items found in nature. Older accounts of fairies describe them as being able to turn invisible at will, just like the Oberon and Puck in A Midsummer Night's Dream. The fairies found in Oakhurst are about 1 to 10 inches tall, just like the fairies in Shakespearean works. Fairies have also been associated with some type of monarchy, just like the fairies in A Midsummer Night's Dream. Fairies cannot resist in meddling with human affairs, just like how Puck and Oberon affect the Athenians' love for one another. No matter what the case, real or fake, fairy lore dates back far before Shakespearean times, and will continue to change throughout our lives.